Hi, and welcome to an episode of the JetRails podcast. I'm Robert Rand, your host. Today, we're going to be talking all about search engine optimization, but a particular niche. So we're going to be talking about SEO best practices when migrating a Magento website. Because SEO onto itself could be a series for this podcast or any other. And so for today's purposes, while a lot of what we're going to talk about will absolutely relate to just about any and every SEO campaign, it's going to be framed from the vantage point of someone that's trying to take a website through a migration process, which can mean more than one thing too. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce the guest of the day. We have Rita here with us from Mobecls. Rita, would you do the honor of introducing yourself?
Yes. Hi, my name is Rita. I work in Mobecls company. Our company provides development services for e-commerce websites, and we focused on Magento.
And now I get to ask my favorite question. Where did Mobecls get its name? Is there a good story there?
Maybe. So the name of our company comes from the mobile cloud solutions. We planned to work in this direction, but it wasn't much popular at the time when we opened the company. And we decided to focus on development on Magento. And there are a lot of fun regarding Mobecls name because it's not easy to pronounce, and there are lots of interesting barriers that come from our clients and our partners. Some of them like Mobecls or Mobelac or Mobecls, but actually the right variant is Mobecls.
That's so funny. We're partner organizations. We have clients in common, and I had no idea where the name came from. This is what the podcast was really all about when I started it. It was finding out where everybody came up with all these names. To dive right in, what is, in your opinion, the biggest difference between launching a new website for the first time when it comes to SEO and migrating an existing site, like from Magento 1 to Magento 2?
The biggest issue regarding this is that SEO specialists have to enhance control and check if all of the done settings work as needed. Because after migration, there can be some situations then some modules migrated, some data migrated, and something stopped working or some backups wasn't done. So it's just regular process. So you need to double check if everything is work fine. It's not enough to just to do settings once, but to see if it works when the website actually migrated. And from the goals point of view, the main difference is that the goals are different. When you launch a website, the goal is to do the right SEO setup. But when you migrate the website, the goal is to migrate all the settings as it is, because it's not a good time to change anything. And even if it's not perfect, you should migrate it as it is.
Yeah, that's funny. So I guess, launching a new website for the first time, you want to give yourself a leg up in SEO. Migrating, you don't want to break your SEO. That's the golden rule. That's my takeaway right there. I know that's going to definitely come up a few more times before we wrap for today. Just don't break anything. I guess it really, that applies for any migration, going from an old version of a website to a new, going from, Shopify to Magento, going from whatever the migration is. And if you're going from, let's say, M1 to M2, it might be easier to avoid some of those pitfalls because it's probably a little easier to keep certain things like URL structure intact. So, why don't we start there and talk a little bit about what best practices look like for the URLs themselves? What are your recommendations when it comes to keeping search engines like Google happy when it comes to maintaining URL structure?
If to speak about migration, just one recommendation: save your URLs as it is. because changing URL is the worst thing that can happen with the existing website, because when Google see the redirect on the old URL, it drop out from index and the new URL comes in the index, and it takes time to get back all the positions that it has.
Well, in essence, the search engine's looking at it like a new page. So you've basically said the old page is gone. This is a new page. And I mean, I can't blame. They're just computers, right? We give them a lot of credit, but they have to evaluate somehow.
Yes, it's just computers. So try to deal with it. Try to live with this. So, and if we speak about launching website, you have to form URLs and give it a sense. For example, your URL should reflect what it is on this page. It's not good to use a lot of numbers or some random symbols in the URL. Keep it as short as possible and as informative as possible. For example, use just some keywords. Maybe it's better to name the URL like white t-shirt Adidas than to name it ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and other random symbols.
I really wanted an ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shirt. but that's so, I think search engines like Google and many others, whether they all have the same market penetration in different countries and, among different user groups, they're looking for things that are going to make sense to people. That I think one of the end goals is, does this page really talk about product or item or whatever it is X, content X? Because if not, why are we going to bring anybody to that page? So that makes sense. But I suppose when you're migrating, at that point, you want to keep everything as close to original as possible. If possible, you want to keep it exact. So URLs, if you're using the www version of the site, if that's what everything redirects to, and that's what the site runs from, you want to keep that in place. If you're going to change that, probably not something you want to do during a migration. Yeah.
Sure. And I think you mentioned a really important thing, www and the URL without www. So it's so simple, but it's the issue that everyone forgets about, to check your redirects if your HTTP version have a redirect to HTTPS and www without www. So it's just simple, but everyone forgets about it.
Yeah. If you're in the middle of a migration and your original site isn't loading securely over HTTPS for all your pages, probably better to fix that before you deal with any migration. You don't want to do that at the same time. Again, it's just another thing that makes search engines like Google unsure in one way or another. In some cases, if the pages are the same, if the site quality is the same, you want to just have them thinking, oh, this is the same stuff. Change stuff before, change it after, weeks apart. I wouldn't do it at the same time if you don't have to. Although I think that this is the one area that I'm more careful about, because as far as I'm concerned, everything should run through the SSL. Everything should be encrypted. So, if it's not encrypted yet, that gives me area for pause. But if the domain name itself, for instance, I've seen people decide that they're going to take their store domain from maybe a subdomain to a base domain. From, let's say, store dot or shop dot to just being whatever .com or whatever domain, and probably migration. I would say probably not the time for that.
Not the time.
Yeah.
Actually, if to speak about changing domain, some clients think that they have the same website. So what happens with search results positions? I'm just changed the name of the website, but the website is still the same. But from the Googlebot point of view, it's another website. Another domain is another website. Even if you put redirects it not save you from the losing positions.
Yeah. I mean, in some way, I guess the best way I could describe this is a relationship your website has with search engines. And, if you completely move and open up somewhere else, they see it as net new. But even, if you change too much within the site itself, it's almost like, the old employee that you had for your website is gone and there's a new one and they don't know this new person yet. So they don't know if they like them. They don't know if they're any good. You've really instituted major change. So, taking it a step further. So, we've got our URLs now, the actual site content and meta information. Does that follow, in your book, a similar rule of thumb? Basically, try to keep it as similar as possible.
Yeah, yes, of course. All the product descriptions, all the titles, all the meta descriptions have to stay the same, because even changing the order of the keywords in the title can change your positions. Even the order, not the content itself. So it is very, very important to keep all the data the same.
Now, what if there aren't any meta descriptions or some of these things already filled out and these are basically blank? In that case, would you feel a little bit better about a user, website owner filling in some of those blanks to have something rather than nothing, or would you still advise them to wait a little bit? I guess that's a tougher one.
If it is blank, I would recommend to fill it with data. If it is blank.
That would be my best shot at it too, because I wouldn't think it would be likely to lose much if it was a page that they were really, really relying on for SEO. I might think to hold off a little bit just until after the site launched. In a few weeks, it happened. After the relaunch, where you could see that everything was okay. No, don't rock the boat. Well, when you're relying on this stuff to pay the bills, it really can make a difference. But basically, other than that, the actual site content, even internal linking, you'd say try to keep as much intact as possible.
Yes. I agree absolutely with you that the closer your new website to the old version, the better.
Yeah. Isn't that, it's funny that in some ways that goes against what so many people think when they're rebuilding their site. They want to make it bigger and better. And when they relaunch it, they want it to be version, 2.0 or however you want to phrase it. So that's always, I think sometimes it's hard to tie people's hands like that, but understanding the value that you just need to plan these things to happen in phases. Do things before the migration, do it after. Don't do it the day you relaunch the site. Don't have that all hit at once.
Yeah, because you have a lot of things to worry about when you migrate your website, and to check if everything is correct, and a lot of things to worry about, not even about SEO. So it's better to do some changes later.
Now, there are going to be, going back to URLs, there are going to be cases where a URL is going to change for a variety of reasons. So at that point, that's going to come back to your 301 redirects. Do you have thoughts on best practices around
that? Usually, during the migration, the filters pages can change. And the good practice is to close the filter pages from Google bots, because they are very similar to category pages and they do not have much value, and it's better to close these pages. So if the filter pages, layer navigation, no, filter pages, if they changed some parameters or the way this URL forms, it's okay, because you closed these pages before, so it will be closed in the future, so it's not a big problem. But if some key URLs changed, for example, category pages, for e-commerce store categories pages drive lots of traffic usually. So of course you should place 301 redirect, not 302, just 301 redirect. And put all the new URLs in the sitemap, submit this sitemap in Search Console. So, and hope for the best.
Well, I think that's the key, is avoid it when you can, but when you can't, there's a tool for it. At that point, a redirect is basically saying, this was the old URL, but that's changed. This is the new one. It's like a forwarding address that you give the post office to say we've moved. So it's not equivalent fully to just using the original, but it's helpful to say, and that's not just to send people to the right page or for Google to know that the page moved. There are people that have a page bookmark. There are people that there are backlinks that you have, probably the number one thing that comes to my mind, that go to the old URL. You don't want to lose that. Backlinks, for instance, help your SEO. They help suggest that other people on websites think that a page is important. And so your SEO can tank if Google basically just sees a new page that doesn't have any of those backlinks, that doesn't have any of that nice history to it. So, obviously there's best practice to testing and making sure that you're keeping your URLs intact. But I know that there are some ways, like going through Search Console, through Webmaster Tools, to look for anything that's popping up as an error, a page that's not redirecting properly. Do you have any favorite tools or systems that help with that?
I'm just using Google Search Console to check all the errors. So it is important it is important to put 301 redirect and not allow the situation when 404 error occurred, because if you had URL category URL, for example, and Google sees that is 404, it's and the new URL, it won't connect these two URLs without 301 redirect. So, and usually I check all these things in Search Console because it's the most reliable data. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I tried some SEO tools, but I faced some differences in real data and what the tools shows. So I decided to use only the tools that Google provides. So it's, for example, for structured data, is Google Structured Data Testing Tool. With the website, it's Search Console, and now it works much better. There are a lot of new features than several years ago. So, and sometimes we use some internal scripts to check if there are errors on the URLs that exist. We use sitemaps. We save a sitemap of the website before the migration, and then we use our own scripts to check if these URLs shows proper responses, HTTP responses, or they have some errors. And when we see that there are messages, that the script shows some messages about errors, we check what happens.
That's interesting. So, you're testing, making sure that this stuff is working properly, and making sure that in my analogy of mail being delivered, that things aren't being sent back to the senders because it can't be delivered as addressed. Do you recommend continuing to keep an eye on that for a period of time because, maybe something didn't trigger in Google yet, but a week or two later or some period of time later, there might still be new 404s or other errors popping that relate to the migration?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. Do I recommend it?
Do you recommend taking a look in Webmaster Tools only like right after the migration, or maybe for once a week for a month? Or what do you normally think is the gold standard when it comes to leveraging that, because I've seen people that they migrate and a day or two later they've got some reporting and then they stop looking. Some things continue to pop.
I think that the first day of the migration is the most important day. You should check everything important in the first 1 or 2 hours when you did the migration, and do it with your own tools, with your own scripts, just with your hands, and you have everything that you can. And then you have to monitor the information that comes in Search Console. I would recommend to do it regularly, twice a day, during 2 weeks. Because you have to know when something happened as soon as possible. So if you know about some errors and after 2 or 3, 1 week after it appeared in a Search Console, it's not good.
Yeah, it's funny that the longer that those things fester and sit, sometimes the harder it is to get back your rankings. So, I get, it's a good point. You don't want them to sit too long. You mentioned sitemaps. So while you're doing all this in Google Search Console, good to submit your Magento sitemaps while you're at it. Do you recommend submitting sitemaps through any of the other webmaster tools, Search Console systems like from Bing or Yandex? I guess some of it depends on the user and if they potentially are going to see any traffic from those, but some of them have some interesting tools.
Yes, usually the work we have is concerning Google and ranking in Google, and on most of the websites, Bing and Yahoo and other search system don't bring a lot of value. But of course, if you work with the consoles of these search engines, you have to do all the same things that you do for Google.
Yeah. So, do you ever find that you have to break out the sitemap into multiple sitemaps for larger sites? Sometimes it's a little bit too big to process well.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes the sitemaps are too big, and you have to divide all the data for several files and to provide the links to these sitemaps in robots.txt file. You can have 4 sitemaps. It's okay. You can have, for example, sitemap of categories URLs and sitemap of product URLs, sitemap of the CMS pages, and so on. So sitemap for images.
Yeah, because you don't want to risk having too large a sitemap, and there are errors generating it or errors with it being read. Sometimes it's if you've got 100,000 SKUs, products in your site. Chances are that's not going to work out very well in one sitemap.
Yes, because it's Google has a determined period of time that it can spend on the website. So, and usually when Googlebot comes to the website, it looks to the robots.txt file and it finds sitemap and it starts to crawling the URLs from the sitemap. And if your sitemap loads for 20 minutes, so
yeah,
he can leave your website. So
right. I hear you there. So everyone should have a robots.txt file in their site. It should have some sort of a reference properly to the location of the sitemap or sitemaps. Any other advice when it comes to the robots file?
Yes, it is common issue that some clients and especially think that to forbid indexing URLs, some URLs in the robots.txt file is enough, but it's not enough. If URL is forbidden in the robots.txt file, but Googlebot can find links to it somewhere on the website or on some other websites, it will crawl this URL. So it is better to forbid indexing using meta robots tag in the HTML code. But it's important that if you forbid indexing in HTML using meta robots tags, there shouldn't be the forbidden in the robot60 file. So it has to be forbidden in one place, in robot60 or in HTML, but not in both, because it will be a conflict, some kind of a conflict.
Interesting.
It's information from Google support and guidance for webmasters. And actually, I thought a long time that it's enough to forbid in robot60 file, and maybe it's better to do it twice in robot60 and in HTML. So I thought, but I've noticed that on some projects that it doesn't work. So, and I started to inspect this information. And
so it almost seemed like an error that doing both would cause a problem, but stranger things have happened. The best advice usually comes from the real world experience.
Yes.
And there's no shortage of oddities in SEO. There's just so many moving parts. So talking about keeping things obfuscated or unavailable for Google to index, there are things that you've already mentioned, pages that show off some filtered version of products available on a website. And how that's really very duplicate content when it comes to category pages, and probably not something that brings a lot of value to have indexed, maybe more problems than help. I know that coming from the web hosting vantage point, that we get our clients typically have development copies of their website, staging copies of their website. Do you have recommendations around how to make sure that you don't accidentally leave one of those available for indexing, or simultaneously block out the good, push out something that's going to block Google and search engines from reading the actual live production copy of your site?
So we block staging version of the website. I can say that usually just disallow the whole website in the robust.exe. It works. Until the links appear somewhere, and it can happen. The link to the website can appear somehow when you do some deployment from the staging to the live version, and sometimes it's very rare situation, but sometimes the links to the staging website can appear on the live website. It's but you can always forbid using MetaRobots tag. It's the best option, I think. So also you can forbid indexing a staging website using xrobots tag in HTTP response.
So makes sense to me. And in terms of overall crawler accessibility, I know that for us, when it comes to firewalling and other, we want to make sure that we let the right bots in, keep the bad ones out, keep the good ones coming in. Have you seen any issues with that over time, where a site has issues because Google can't crawl it?
Yes, it was the case from one of the website. It did active search engine optimization with the help of SEO agency, and this website started rapidly losing its positions. And the SEO specialist from the agency told that the reason was in low quality backlinks. And the website owner started to send lots of emails trying to remove such links. But as I know, the low quality backlinks, they're usually just dismissed. It's not a kind of ban from Google. They just dismiss all these links.
Unless you have a manual penalty, in which case, I don't run into those very much anymore. I don't know how much Google's even applying them anymore, but if you did, you clean up the mess and you leave all the good links, because if you get rid of all of your good links, you're doing even more damage. It's like, why are you punching yourself? Yes. Here you are getting in trouble for bad links. Could you please keep the good ones that suggest that you are a valuable website?
Yes, you are absolutely right. You have to think twice when you removing some links, because it's an essential part of search engine optimization, and it's a ranking signal. It's important ranking signal. So you have to be absolutely sure that this thing should be removed. So, and I try to understand if it's true that this website is started to losing its position because of the links. So I tried to get this website link profile using different online tools. Lots of such tools in the web. So I tried maybe 7 or 10 tools, and I didn't got this link profile because I got error messages from several tools that the website is blocking access. So it looks like they did a very tough SEO optimization. They and secure, maybe from it was some security issues, but they restrict access to the bot. And it can happen that they restricted access to the Google bot as well. So you have to be very careful when you do such things. So you have to be sure that you forbid access only for the bad bots and not for the good bots like search bots.
Yeah, it's like all things in life, yes. Things aren't always completely black and white. Sometimes there's gray area, and you need to speak to that. That's typically true in technology. As much as we want to think it's all Boolean and zeros and ones, and that's it, there's middle ground somehow.
Yes.
That it's more complex than just the zeros and ones. There's a lot of complex logic out there. So, and any particular advice as it relates to canonicals and international copies of sites? Other particular situations that you run into with sites that have a variety of versions of the same content?
So my advice is not to place canonical to the main page on the pagination, on the paginated pages. Paginated pages it's not a duplicate. It contains different product URLs. If we speak about e-commerce website, it contains different product URLs. So Google, it's okay if Google find these links and follow these links and crawling products URLs. So do not put canonical to the category page on the paginated pages. And if you have a website with regional version, for example, you have a website example.com and example.de, for example, for Germany and for the US, and your content is absolutely the same, just in different languages. So you have to use hreflang tags in HTML because now Google bots are smart, and so they can recognize the same content in different languages. But if you tell that it's my website, just in different language, just show this website in Germany and this website in the US, it's okay. But if you don't do this, some of the website can be considered as low quality or duplicate or something like that.
And how about structured data, rich snippets, schema.org related content? I've actually seen years ago a situation that I lost some good sleep over, where it turned out that some SEO rankings were potentially suffering because there were two Magento extensions in a site that had been rebuilt from, I believe, Magento 1 to Magento 2, specifically, that were conflicting, and they were throwing the structured data off, and that was having a terrible, again, at least potentially, impact on the SEO. Seemed to recover a bit after that was addressed. Do you have recommendations for generally just the use of structured data, of best practices around it? Do you find that it's overall helpful for Magento
yes, structured
sites?
Yes, structured data is quite helpful and quite important because it can be used even not by Googlebot, but for example, when you use Google Shopping and Google Merchant account, and you submit a product feed in the Google Merchant Center, and it can compare the information that you submit in the feed with the information that displayed on the page and the information that shown in structured data on this page. So, and it can, for example, compare this information, and if there is a difference in the feed, for example, and in the information on the page, it can block this URL from showing in the ads service. So structured data is important for SEO and for some advertising systems. When you put structured data on the website, you have to think what is this page about, and what type of structured data is applicable here. For example, for e-commerce website, for product pages is product markup, and no need to show separately organization markup on product pages. Usually organization and local businesses markups is better for main page, contact us page, about us page, but not for product page, for example.
I'm always surprised at how many sites don't take advantage of these tools. It's another layer to manage, and it gets me thinking about. So, if you have structured data, I imagine you want that to live on during your migration. You don't want to lose data. It's just another point where you don't want it to seem like the site is different or not the same. You want to keep your rankings. Perhaps the same would be said for user-generated content like product reviews, or if you have on your product pages or other pages, user-generated FAQs or Q&A sections, things like that. I imagine the same applies. You want to make sure that anything that's in your old site content-wise is going to copy to the new site, even if it's not in your main database per se. It's in some added tables from some particular Magento extension, that even if you're not going to use that exact extension, you need the content.
Yes, sure. And you mentioned reviews. Reviews is a very important thing for the e-commerce websites, for the products. So yes, if you have to have the same data on the page that you had before. If you remove something, it's you likely lose some positions. If you add some information new to the existing one, so it can be, but not removing.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about 404 errors. I know there are other errors that happen, many more that potentially can happen. In terms of the quality of the coding, I'd like to think that if you go from a site that's been around 5 or 10 years, that's really very efficient and well operated, and if you jump the gun, as they say, and launch a site that hasn't really gotten through a good user acceptance testing (UAT) process, that's full of various errors and just inconsistencies in coding, that's probably not going to help your ranking either. Do you have any particular thoughts on best practice around making sure that your code quality is strong before you approve the site for launch?
Yes, I usually use Lighthouse Audit. It shows a lot of information starting from a server response or some images optimization or some scripts that block the web page from loading and other issues. So as a SEO specialist, I use this tool. I find it the most convenient, and there are a lot of information.
Yeah, basically, if if the code isn't clean, you're going to hunt down those developers.
Yes, but there are some code control from the developer side. I'm not involved in this process of the when, for example, when some new functionality implemented and our developers. They all know that SEO is important, that page speed is important. So our developers do some tests before they launch their code and implement
it's
something.
Not just in these situations if the page loads, right? Because the search engine, it's reading all that code. When it's got a bunch of junk in there that it doesn't like, it can't be really helping the situation. And I guess, some of this goes back to some other principles that are really important. So, at JetRails, we worked very, very hard on loading speed optimization for clients, really cutting down that time to first byte. We're deploying content delivery network, solutions, different caching layers, which, we work with agencies on, like to deploy Varnish together. We'll really optimize and configure Varnish, but there's hole punching and other things that have to be done on the development side. And then there's things like minifying and compressing files. And, we know that there's a ton that goes into getting a site loading quickly, and that Google cares about loading speed more than ever. This is a mobile first generation. So even if it weren't, it's just part of the algorithms now. Do you have any particular thoughts on that process? Do you usually speed test sites at some point in this process to make sure that that's not the weak link in the chain?
We try to improve the page speed load when migrating the website. So these things should not stay the same. The new website should work faster. So our developers do some server tests, and I usually use Lighthouse Audit, as I mentioned, to check the load and some web page tests to see the speed. So, and as you mentioned, the minifying files, there are some settings in the Magento that's just a simple click, enable yes, and your web page speed is much more faster. So, and there are a lot of servers tools that helps to optimize the page speed for images compressing and for files.
Yeah, that's, we know it doesn't come easy, but it's worth it. As a team, we invest a lot into that. I'd say the same, so bad. We've talked about a few different types of errors. I'd throw in there that server errors are just as damaging. If you've got certain pages or actions that are generating some form of 500 error, something's unresponsive or not loading properly, these are things that need to be addressed swiftly. It may be something that wasn't caught in user acceptance testing, but you need to be monitoring for anything that could be impeding both users and search engines as they're both trying to go about their business of going through your site. It's funny that we run into things that cause issues around this, whether it's a DDoS attack or just standard scalability. That if a user doesn't have the resources that they need server wise, or if they aren't well optimized in one way or another, or they've got bottlenecks, you don't want your site to be unresponsive or slow when Google's trying to read it. So we do a lot of load testing and try to make sure that even at peak times that's going to work out well. That there's the same. Well, I mean, we talked at the beginning of the podcast about security. You need that SSL running. It does factor in, to my understanding, into SEO rankings, but any sort of a security incident could throw all of your SEO rankings in flux. That if your site has to be taken down because of a breach, or your site has some kind of warning page coming up from browsers like Google Chrome, and the site can't be indexed, that's going to kill all your marketing. And that, not only can it damage your brand and your reputation, but you can lose SEO rankings over it. Sometimes I tell, if you invested the same way into the security of your site that you are into your marketing, basically to protect your marketing, wouldn't the world be a little bit different? Wouldn't we hear about a lot fewer sites impacted by bad actors and malicious activity? It's funny that I think that it's not all about equal dollar spend or anything like that, but just maybe equal consideration that that these things need to happen in order to have good long-term success.
Security is quite an important topic nowadays, because after GDPR document was announced, and CCPA, I guess, not sure if I pronounced it correctly.
Data Privacy
CCPA, yes.
Act. Yeah, sure.
Yes, security issues are very, very important, and from nothing, it's maybe SEO here is not so vital, but really, if you have a web store, you have to protect your users' information, because real people can lose real money, and just because of the website didn't implement some modern solutions, it's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, like everything that we're talking about, it's about not just trusting, but testing and verifying. So for our customers, we run malware scanners and intrusion detection systems, and we have our network operations center, our NOC monitoring, round the clock monitoring 24/7. There are all these layers of proactive and reactive security that work together, because you don't want to risk that there's some kind of what we know as a 0-day security event where there's something that was unknown that the Magento itself isn't patched for, isn't secure against, and firewalls and such haven't seen yet. But it's going to get your site. It doesn't have to be a big site to be impacted. Hackers look for low-hanging fruit. So if they find a vulnerability in one site out there, whether it's Magento or WordPress or Drupal, or pick a popular system, they'll go and check every other site of its kind that they can. So it's a funny world out there. That it's all logical when you stop and think about it.
And if to speak about e-commerce website and web stores and that are operated by Magento, it is important to have a support team that will carry all the works regarding updates, security patch installations, and things like that, and monitoring of the website, because if you do not have a support team, so that do all this work for you, how do you handle with your security issues?
If you don't have a good developer and a good host working for you and working together well, security, speed, these things, you might have them temporarily, but these are moving targets. These are not things that stay static as your site changes, as things happen in the outside world and things happen within your site and your organization. I'm going to circle back though. So, we've talked about so many different aspects of SEO that you want to be careful with as you launch or relaunch a site in this case. as you go through a migration or a replatforming. Do you have any recommendations around baseline SEO reporting to help, outside of maybe Search Console and the things that we've talked about, things to help watch the rankings and the site health before and sort of have that baseline, know where you were at and make sure that you're equal or better after the relaunch?
For example, you can use some SEO tools to monitor website like SEMrush, like Mobecls, and also check the data in Google Analytics because it shows the data in real time, and you can immediately see on what pages your traffic dropped, for example. And from what channels. So use all the tools that you can, and it's convenient for you, because some SEO tools is just the question maybe of the habit and what is convenient for the specialist. So, but SEMrush and Moz may be the most popular.
Moz may be my all-time favorite set of SEO tools. There are some things you can access for free. And then there are paid tools. They are around a very long time. I know that there's some others that have been popping up a little bit more in the e-commerce world in recent years at different trade shows and things, companies like DeepCrawl. I could probably put together an article of just links to some of these tools and companies that someone might benefit from. But, I think you need to pick your favorites. And there's a lot to pick from, but even, have something. Know where you started, know what's changing, know where you might have been getting a thumbs up in an SEO report that, you had, all of your alt tags on your homepage and now you've got none for your images. Well, that's not good. You don't want to go backwards. You had H1 and H2 tags on these pages and now you don't. Things that you covered bases before and now those things are gone or in flux. Now, when it, I'll add something else that I didn't think about earlier when we talked about 404s, but I always like seeing a custom 404 page. And during a migration or some other big event of its kind, I always think that people are more likely to see the 404 page, whether we like it or not. It's probably a good time to make sure that that's something that invites them to find something else in the site or to appreciate the brand and not just feel like the site stinks and this is, I'm out of here.
Really customized 404 pages is a great marketing tool. For example, these product won't be on your website again, and you have to show for all 4 page. But you can add some cool pictures, some recommendations. For example, look at this and this and this product, and it can improve your conversion rate and can lower your bounce rate. So the people will click on your recommendations. So customized 404 pages, it's a great thing. It's regarding user experience. Actually, now user experience is more important than ever because Googlebot announced new algorithm, and page experience now has a great impact on ranking. And there are a lot of interesting information for SEO specialists. We received a lot of requests now last month regarding UX improvements. So actually now we work with the golddiscount.com. It's one of the most popular web store selling golf equipment, and this website wants to make some improvements, and it's a huge responsibility to do UX improvements on the website that has thousands of users, because users get used to some interface, and if you change it a lot, it won't be good. So you have to make changes step by step and to save the best the website has, and to add something new and better.
Well, that's a good point, that search engines get to look at things potentially like bounce rates and other metrics about what users are really thinking about the site, the amount of time people spend on the site, the amount of pages that they visit. There's there's a variety of data that informs the search engine rankings, the SERPs. So I think that that's a really important point, that in all of this, all of these little technical pieces that we've been talking about that you don't want to break, or you don't want to have any problems, you also have to make sure that users are still happy with the end product and that you didn't change things so much, so drastically, that you've taken away something that was really positive in the past. So I'm going to sort of transition to what I think should be probably the last segment, last few questions here. The migration happens. What should the expectation be of the search engine rankings? My historical experience has been what I like to call, and others in the industry call, the Google roller coaster, that your rankings are going to be in flux. They're going to go up and down for sometimes days and on occasion weeks, as Google's indexes and other search engine indexes take note and figure out where they believe that your new version of your website and the new versions of your web pages belong. Is that still pretty accurate thinking?
Yes, in the short term, you have to expect some downs in traffic and positions, but in the long term, you have to expect more traffic and higher positions. Because you did migration for better performance, for better page speeds. So if it's done correctly, you will see the up in the long term. But in the short term, there can be some downs.
Yeah. I know we have on our blog a recent article where we had partners recommend different link building sources, ways of building healthy backlinks to an e-commerce site. Do you find that for a relaunch like this, that it's a good time to do a little bit of backlinking, maybe even something like a press release announcing the awesome new version of the website that's going to do all these great things for shoppers, just to give Google and other search engines that little extra boost that there's still this interest and value in the site?
Backlinks are always good for a website if they're done properly. If you understand where this link should be placed and what attributes it should have, and from website it's okay to have a backlink, and which website is not okay for your industry, it's okay to have backlinks. But be careful with this, because it's as it is important ranking signal. Google pays a lot of attention to some manipulations, and you can have some penalty.
If a backlink is too easy to get, if it seems too good to be true, if someone's telling you that they can sell you something amazing, like most things in the world, be circumspect. Try to stick to things that seem natural and real and organic, and something that a real person would appreciate. Oh, look, this major news site is recommending, this Magento e-commerce website that sells this particular thing, in an article about buying those things. Well, that sounds pretty good. When you're just dumping in comments somewhere in the bottom of some page that has nothing to do with your products and your site, and you're just throwing backlinks around. Well, that's not really what it's all about. So there's a lot of room in between, right?
Yes, and please do not buy 1,000 of links for $10. No, it's not a good option.
No,
really.
More damage to try to get rid of them later. You have no idea how expensive that $10 that you just spent could really be. That's like buying something from the cop on the corner who's offering you something illicit that you shouldn't be buying. That $10 is going to cost you a lot more or whatever the going rate. So this has been a lot of fun for me, at least. I always love chatting SEO, especially with someone with this much expertise. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share? I know the world is still a bit upside down, and your team does a lot of things in the market. Anything interesting that you want to share? Any last words of wisdom before we wrap for the day?
So we covered a lot of questions regarding security issues, regarding some website pickups and downtime, and the importance of server. Now I see the situation when the lockdowns and quarantine time happened in lots of countries, that in e-commerce there was a boost of sales. The merchants faced with lots of orders, and some of them were unable to handle this a huge number of orders because of the server errors, because of some gaps in their order processing. And so I would recommend to think about these things, and to be prepared for some big sales that can happen. So not always be prepared for bad, but be prepared for good as well.
That is the challenge, right? Being prepared for the unexpected, whatever that may look like. And
yes, and when merchants do a lot of efforts to get customers come to their websites, and when there are hundreds of orders, but they cannot manage with it, it's sad, because they can be prepared for good.
Yeah.
But
it's a wacky world out there, that's for sure, that we're always surprised by something. I know right now we're riding the wave of Magento 1 end of life, and we're talking to merchants all week long, advising them on how to best navigate that, and how to secure themselves, and how to continue to operate effectively. Things that I think you're ready with one thing, but then there's something else you didn't think about. And so for a lot of merchants, it was things related to their payment processors and PCI compliance assessors, and things that they say, oh, if we do X, we're okay. And the most interesting thing about e-commerce is that it takes a village, and there's a lot of moving parts, and it's rarely about one thing, one magic bullet. I think if this episode does anything, it helps highlight just how many things have to come together to really, really get the results that you're looking for. But when you do, it can absolutely be well worth it. So, Rita, really a pleasure having you on today. I hope we get to have you again on a different topic in the future. For our listeners, as always, thank you for tuning in, and feel free to subscribe wherever you watch videos or listen to podcasts like this one. We hope to hear from you with any comments, feedback. Hit those star buttons, hit those like buttons if this has been helpful for you. And with that, happy selling.